What's good, YouTube? Today's video is going to be a balanced druid guide for Dragonflight. We're going to cover everything for the balanced druid, from talents to tier sets, rotation, stat priority and consumables, and also any macros that you might want to use. And then I'll also go over my overall thoughts on this spec at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. So if this video does help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also subscribe to your boy. But let's crack on with the guide. So first, I'll run over a few different builds for the balanced druid. There's one that's catered more for your raid encounters, although I will just drop in a quick pure single target build as well. And there's also two builds that you can swap out for AoE to cater towards your Mythic Plus dungeons or cleave fights. This first build is the raid talent build that primarily focuses on a nice balance of AoE and single target damage. This is because very few boss fights in the Vault of Incarnates are actually pure single target, so this build is something you are likely to play for many fights. Like I said though, I will however show you a quick pure single target build just after for fights like Teros. So we'll start with the class talent tree then. We're going to stick 1 point in Frenzied Regeneration. Just whenever we drop into bear form, we can get a nice 32% heal. We're going to further bolster our defensives with improved Bark Skin, which is going to increase the duration of Bark Skin. And then we're going to make Frenzied Regeneration increase the healing we receive by 20% as well as Bark Skin. For some further self-sustain, we're going to take Rejuvenation and also a point in Swift Mend for that extra instant heal. Then obviously as the balanced druid, we would be trolling if we didn't take Starfire, Star Surge, Sunfire, and obviously Moonkin form. We're then going to come down and put 2 points in Nurturing Instinct, increasing the magical damage we do and also the healing by 6%. We're going to add some range to our abilities by taking Astral Influence. We are going to take Iron Fur over here, which is basically just a filler talent point so that we can get down to Thick Hide to reduce all damage taken by 6%, which is actually huge. We're then going to take Wild Charge, mainly for Moonkin form, so we get a disengage out of that on a 15-second cooldown, so if we ever need to leap out of a mechanic quickly, we can do so. We're going to take Soothe, again for raid encounters. This isn't going to be too useful, however it does have some niche use cases, but it's mainly just a filler point to come down this middle part of the tree. After that, we're going to take Improved Sunfire, which is now going to apply Sunfire to all enemies within 8 yards. And kind of another filler ability for raiding scenarios is Typhoon. You could take a point out of here and put it in Remove Corruption, for instance. You could whack it in Wild Growth as well. We are just going to have to use that extra point to get down to the bottom of the tree. After that, we're going to take Stampeding Roar. This is actually a massively underrated raid cooldown, increasing movement speed by 60% of all friendly players within 20 yards on 1 minute cooldown because we talent into Improved Stampeding Roar down here. We're going to come back up to take Matted Fur, just giving us an extra absorb shield whenever we pop Bark Skin or Survival Instincts if we were to be able to use that. Come down here and you can swap out between Incapacitating Roar and Mighty Bash dependent on the fight. This is nice for AoE interrupting, and obviously this is nice for a single target stun. Down here we've got another defensive in Well-Honed Instincts. If you played Shadowlands, you'll be familiar with this, but whenever we fall below 40% health, we're going to trigger a free Frenzied Regeneration, which is going to heal us for 32% of our health, but this does have an internal cooldown of 90 seconds. To bolster our defenses even further, we're going to take Renewal, just because we can, an instant 30% heal that's usable in all shapeshift forms. Coming back up then, we're going to take Ursul's Vortex, just a nice piece of CC, or Mass Entanglement dependent on the fight if you need it. But again, this is kind of just a filler talent so that we can get down to Innovate, a huge cooldown for your healers that's going to allow them to cast spells without spending mana for 10 seconds on those longer fights where they do need the mana regeneration. After that, we're going to take Nature's Vigil, which is actually going to be huge in a single target boss encounter, a 1.5 minute cooldown, but it does last 30 seconds. That converts 20% of all our single target damage into healing on a friendly nearby target. So that is going to be our general class talent tree for raiding. You definitely can still switch things up though. For instance, you could take 1 point out of here and then whack it in the Heart of the Wild if you feel you need it. If you don't need the movement speed, you could take 1 point out of Improved Stampeding Roar and whack it in Ursine Vigor again, or Heart of the Wild. It's completely up to you, but this is the general class talent tree that I would recommend. Over to the spec specific tree then. We're going to start up the top with the core of the spec, Eclipse. I'll go over this talent further in the rotation part of the guide. We're then going to come down, take Shooting Stars, which is going to cause our Moonfire, Sunfire and Stellar Flare if you're talented into it, giving a chance to cool down a Falling Star, dealing some astral damage and also generating 2 astral power. With the new talent rework in 10.0.5, we're then going to take Solar Beam so that we can get over to Starfall. This is our main AoE spender that we can use multiple times, and this ability can overlap. It also extends the duration of your Moonfires and Sunfires when you talent into Ethereal Kindling, just extending the duration of these dots by 4 seconds. We're then going to come and take Twin Moons. In Dragonflight, Moonfire is doing a lot of your damage, so this is going to further increase that by making it deal 10% increased damage, but also hitting another nearby enemy within 15 yards of the target. This makes for much nicer spreading of Moonfires in AoE situations, so you can get your dots up and not have to think about it too much. In this build, we're then going to come over and take Nature's Balance, which is going to cause us to generate 1 astral power every 2 seconds while in combat. This doesn't sound too much as it is, but it is definitely some nice passive AP generation. And it also allows us to start any boss encounter with 50 AP, because when we're out of combat, your AP rebalances to 50 instead of depleting to empty. Coming back up the top then, we're going to take Solstice. Whenever we enter an eclipse, it's going to cause our shooting stars to fall 200% more often, making for some nice extra AP generation and also some nice passive damage. We're going to take Stellar Flare just for an extra dot, and this is going to generate 8 astral power whenever you use it. But the main reason we're taking this ability is for the Waning Twilight debuff. Whenever we have 3 periodic effects or dots on a target, your damage and healing on them are increased by 8%. Obviously, we mainly care about the damage portion of this, so when you have your Moonfire, Sunfire and Stellar Flare rolling, which you should at all times, especially on single target, you're going to be dealing 8% increased damage to that target. Coming in the middle, we're going to take our main cooldown in Celestial Alignment. This grants us both eclipses and then also grants us 10% haste for 20 seconds. On the left, we're going to take Soul of the Forest, increasing the AP generation from Wrath by 50%, but also increasing the area of effect damage from Starfire by 150%. Very nice for AoE encounters. In the middle, we're going to take Primordial Arcanic Pulsar, which every time we spend 600 astral power, it's going to grant us Celestial Alignment, our main cooldown, for 12 seconds. On the right hand side, whenever an eclipse ends, we're going to gain 15% haste for 6 seconds. This allows us to quickly get back into our next eclipse and do some more damage. Down here, we're going to take Cosmic Rapidity, basically causing our dots to tick a lot faster. In the middle, we're going to take Umbral Embrace, which whenever we deal astral damage, it has a chance to cause our next Wrath or Starfire cast to deal an additional 50% damage. But this is nice because it only works during an eclipse, so you're getting that extra damage from that as well. Over on the right, we're going to put 2 points in Power of Goldrin. I missed this ability from Legion, so I'm glad it's back. Whenever we Star Surge, it's going to have a chance to summon the Spirit of Goldrin, which sends out a wolf to the target, dealing some astral damage. Just a nice bump of passive extra single target damage there. Down here on the left, we're going to take Orbit Breaker, which every 30 of Shooting Star is going to cool down a full moon at your target for 80% of the power. This is going to generate you a lot of passive AP during a fight and also deal some chunky damage. On the right, we're going to take Balance of All Things. We're only going to put 1 point in this with this build. Whenever we enter an eclipse, it's going to increase our critical strike chance by 16% and decrease by 2% every 1 second. Just some nice extra damage whenever we enter an eclipse. Sundered Firmament in the middle is going to cause every other eclipse that we enter to create a Fury of Elune at 20% effectiveness that follows our current target for 8 seconds. This is more used for the AP gen, as obviously it's not going to deal that much damage. 2 points in Star-Lord for the extra haste. This is pretty much a 12% haste buff at all times, and dependent on the fight, you could either take Starweaver or Rattle the Stars. For pure single target or pure AoE, I would take Rattle the Stars, but as this build is a bit of a mix of both, we're going to put 1 point in Starweaver, giving our Star Surge a 20% chance to make our next Starfall free, but also giving our Starfall a 40% chance to make our next Star Surge free. This can proc off of each other as well, so you can get a nice chain of free casts back to back, just for some extra nice crossover damage. On the last row then, we're going to take Denizen of the Dream. This is just going to give our Moonfire and Sunfire a chance to summon a Fairy Dragon to assist us in battle, and these last 30 seconds, you can summon more than one of these at once, and they just deal some nice passive extra damage. We're going to buff up our main cooldown with Incarnation. This adds an additional 10% critical strike chance when we're in our main cooldown and also causes it to last an additional 10 seconds. Finally, for this talent tree build then, we're also going to take Fury of Elune. This is going to generate us 40 astral power over its duration and also deal a nice bit of AoE damage. This would be classed as like a minor cooldown for the Balanced Druid, and obviously we're getting them from every other eclipse with Sundered Firmament as well. So this is probably the build you're going to run in most raid fights in Vault of the Incarnates. Obviously, barring Teros, there isn't really a pure single target fight in this raid, but this build is also going to give us that priority damage that we do need. I'll quickly run over a build that we're going to use for Teros then. So the main changes in this build is obviously we can see that we're not going to take Starfall or Ethereal Kindling now. We're going to put a point in Force of Nature. This is nice especially for Teros because you can use this on the move to get some extra AP gen and also summon Trents to attack our target for 10 seconds. Once again, just for some nice extra passive single target damage. The only other changes in this build then is you're going to put one more point in Balance of All Things. Like I said, for pure single target, we're going to take Rattle the Stars, reducing the cost of our Star Surge and Starfall by 5%, but also increasing the damage by 10%, and this stacks up to 2 times. For fights like this as well, we're going to go with New Moon. This is then going to transform into Half Moon and Full Moon. A lot of AP gen comes from the spell itself, and also deals some nice burst damage. And the final change for this build is we're actually going to take Convoke the Spirits. You'll want to pair this up with Celestial Alignment, but I will go over this in the rotation part of this guide. These next builds that I'm going to go over are builds that focus primarily on sustained AoE while taking the high value nodes in the tree. These are perfect for Mythic Plus or AoE raid encounters. In 10.0.5, as I'm sure you're aware, our spec talent tree got a full rework, so there are situations where this build will be changed as we progress through this patch. Currently, there are 2 AoE builds, one that plays with mushrooms and one without. I personally prefer the one with at the moment, as I feel mushrooms are an underrated talent, but I've seen people playing both. It's also going to depend on the affixes on the key, the level of the key, and also what dungeon you're playing. So the main points that we're going to be changing in the class tree is we're going to put 1 point in Cyclone. This is nice for weeks like Bolstering, where you can Cyclone the big ad so that it doesn't get any bolster stacks. There are some other niche case scenarios where you would use this ability, but it's specifically nice for Mythic Plus. We're then also going to put a point in Gale Winds down here. You could swap between these two if you would like. For instance, this talent right here would be nice for maybe a Sanguine week where you need to Typhoon mobs out of the puddles more often. But in general, you probably just want to default put a point in Gale Winds. This is a little buff to Typhoon that increases the radius by 20% and its range by 5 yards. Nice for mass AoE interrupting any mobs that you need. Over on the spec tree then, it is pretty similar to the first build that we went over for most raid encounters in the Vault of Incarnates. The only real changes I can see is Rattle the Stars that you want to take for that Starfall spam. You want to keep as much uptime as you can on this ability, but then obviously because this is the mushroom build, you're going to put 1 point in Wild Mushroom. But when you do take Wild Mushroom, you always want to supplement it with taking Fungal Growth. This is going to add an additional dot to the Wild Mushrooms, but also slow them by 50%, which is some nice utility for Mythic Plus. I really like this build because in AoE situations, you can pretty much instantly get the uptime on Wailing Twilight. So you're going to be hitting all mobs in the pack for 8% extra damage, assuming that you've got your Moonfire and Sunfire already on all targets. It also does some heavy AoE burst, which is very nice to get the Balance Druid ramped up in those AoE situations. So that is the mushroom build. I'm really enjoying this build at the moment. Obviously, like I said, you've got the AoE burst, especially when you're talented into Balance of All Things. But in dungeons where there's lower densities of mobs, or maybe even on a tyrannical week, you might want to go with the no mushroom AoE build. So this build obviously takes the points out of Wild Mushroom and Fungal Growth here. We're going to put 1 point in Denizen of the Dream. This is really nice to just buff up your single target that little bit more. We're going to put 1 more point in Balance of All Things here to get the extra crit chance. And then over here, we have swapped to Starweaver, but again, depending on the dungeon, you can always swap between these two. However, Starweaver is a nice talent, especially for those low mob density dungeons. I'm thinking Temple of the Jade Serpent, Court of Stars, and also Shadow Moon Burial Grounds. I do just want to note though that it is still very early into this patch and therefore also our rework. So there's a lot of testing going on and there still could be some changes to come. For instance, people are testing out this Astral Smolder talent in dungeons where there's a lot of mobs grouped up together. So this is in reference to Algathar Academy, Knocker Defensive, etc. where we're going to get that extra AoE damage from our Starfire that has actually become more of a priority to press in this latest patch. It is unfortunate that we don't get to take any of these final point nodes, but unfortunately the rest of our talent tree is just too good to actually get down this far. For instance, Friend of the Fae would be nice for single target, but my personal favourite is Elun's Guidance. It feels really nice to play with, especially in AoE scenarios where you're going to be spamming those Starfalls because of that reduced AP cost. So those are the current different talent builds for the Balanced Druid. All in all, I don't think they will change too much from the builds that I've shown in this guide. However, I did just want to give you guys the heads up that it's still early when I am actually making this. On to the next part of the guide then, I want to run over the tier set. For Balance, our set bonus revolves around generating 3 procs of Starfall or Star Surge and empowering them. After empowering your spender, your builders in Wrath and Starfire are also empowered. The 2-set allows Star Surge and Starfall to increase the damage of your next Wrath or Starfire by 20%, stacking up to 3 times, and then working in conjunction, the 4-set then means that whenever you enter Eclipse, your next Star Surge or Starfall costs no astral power and deals 35% increased damage. This tier set does actually change the way you play this spec considerably, but the basic idea is that you want to cycle Eclipses as fast as possible, spend your 4-set on Star Surge on single target and Starfall on AoE, and also do not cap your 2-set procs. For the rotation then, Balanced Druid gameplay is a standard build and spend class with a predictable cadence to your rotation. The core of the gameplay is deciding which Eclipse to enter by casting 2 of the opposite spells, Wrath or Starfire. Currently, we are prioritizing Lunar Eclipse for all phases, but during cooldowns we cast Wrath. Eclipse uptime is incredibly important and you should aim to be inside Eclipse as often as you can. From there on, you build astral power using the appropriate filler while maintaining your dots on all targets to activate your mastery bonus. And on single target, dump your astral power with Star Surge and then use Starfall on AoE encounters. Moonkin's opener is nice because it doesn't really change from AoE to single target at the moment. So let's go over the opening rotation. Please note that this can also be used as a cooldown priority list, but the basic idea is you start by pre-casting 2 Wraths at 2 seconds on the pull timer in a raid scenario. Then you apply or maintain your Moonfire and Sunfire, reapply these dots when they have 30% remaining on their duration, apply or maintain your Stellar Flare, once again reapply this dot when it has 30% remaining on its duration. After that, consume the 4-set buff with Star Surge on single target or Starfall on multi-target. Next, use Celestial Alignment or Incarnation. If you're talented in Convoke the Spirits, use this now, and if you are below 40 astral power. Next, cast Star Surge on single target and Starfall on AoE, and do not cap your astral power. If you're playing the Mushroom build, here's where you cast a Wild Mushroom on AoE, and if you're using these to maintain Waning Twilight, then stagger these casts. After that, cast Fury of Elune, and finally you'll cast Wrath on single target and Starfire on multi-targets during your cooldowns. After this opener, you will want to follow this priority system for single target. Dot targets with Moonfire and Sunfire with 100% uptime. This is very important due to our mastery. Next, we're going to dot with Stellar Flare. You want to stay in Eclipse as often as possible. As it currently stands on single target, you are prioritizing Lunar Eclipse. You want to avoid capping astral power by spending on Star Surge. Then we're going to use minor cooldowns like Fury of Elune. Use Convoke the Spirits as often as possible if you're talented into it, but try to line this up with Celestial Alignment. Next, we're going to Starfire to consume the Umbral Embrace proc whenever we are in Eclipse. After that, press Wrath to generate astral power. As stated above, with Lunar Eclipse being our single target priority, you still want to Wrath inside of Lunar Eclipse unless you get an Umbral Embrace proc. And then for AoE encounters, you'll want to follow this rotation and priority. Again, we're going to keep our Moonfire and Sunfire up with 100% uptime. This is the first global priority. Then we're going to get into Eclipse ASAP or press Incarnation. If we are going to use cooldowns on AoE, you just activate it after you have everything dotted. Next, we're going to Starfall until we are 0 astral power. Our next priority is to not let ourselves cap to 3 Wild Mushrooms. They do a ton of AoE damage, and with our Waning Twilight debuff, we'll want to make sure Fungal Growth is up as long as possible, but we do want to stagger these casts. Next, we'll use Fury of Elune as often as possible. This ability is great AP generation and also some nice damage in AoE encounters. After that, we're going to Stellar Flare targets that will live longer than 8 seconds, assuming the trash pack also takes longer than 30 seconds. But we do not want to cap on astral power to get our Stellar Flares out. And lastly, we're going to spam Starfire. As far as stats go, if you're ever confused if a piece of gear is an upgrade, I would always recommend you to sim your character first. That being said, for the Balanced Druid, you basically want mastery and a little dash of everything else. Single target stat weights are very similar to multi-target. Anything with mastery on it is an added bonus, but don't sacrifice too much item level to get mastery, as intellect is king. Haste is our second best secondary stat, followed closely by crit and versatility. Next, we're going to go over the recommended consumables for the Balanced Druid. For enchants on your character, I'd recommend going with Sophic Devotion for your weapon, Graceful Avoidance for your cloak. On chest, you're going to want to go with Waking Stats, Braces, Devotion of Avoidance. On your legs, go with Frozen Spell Thread. Boots, you'll go with Watcher's Loam. And finally, for your rings, you'll want the Devotion of Mastery. Overall, the best file for the Balanced Druid is the file of Elemental Chaos. However, many players are running file of Tepid Versatility as it is very close in damage, but also provides damage reduction. Elemental Potion of Power is going to be your DPS potion of choice, with Refreshing Healing Potion being your best healing potion. Balanced Druid is always going to use the Howling Rune for the weapon haste buff. and ideally you'd want to consume a feast for the intellect buff, but sizzling seafood medley are a good backup as some personal food. You want to use keen Neltherite in your gem slots. If you're using a primalist gem, it will likely be the skillful Illimited Diamond. So for macros for the Balanced Druid, here are a few that I'm actually using. So for my priority kicks, I normally stick them on my focus, and then I can use macros like cast at focus solar beam, cast at focus cyclone, cast at focus entangling root, so that I don't have to swap targets if I need to interrupt or CC my focus target. For balance, I also have a few mouse over macros, so I have innovate on a mouse over macro. This is nice so I don't actually have to click my healer before pressing innovate. I can just wave my cursor over the party frame and then press my keybind. I use the same keybind for remove corruption if I'm talented into it, and also rebirth. I have my DPS macro here just to macro in my racial with my main cooldown, and also use my trinket if I have an on use. And finally, a nice little macro for the thundering affix is this macro right here. This makes it so that if I'm in Moonkin form and I want to clear my thundering debuff, I find the person that I want to clear with and I can press this macro twice and it will take me out of Moonkin form and then use Wild Charge in human form so that I leap to them and instantly clear my debuff. That's about as far as it goes for macros for my Balanced Druid. I'll put a paste bin in the description so that you guys can just copy them straight from there if you want to use them yourself. Overall, Moonkin's really surprised a lot of people coming into Dragonflight in my opinion. It is easily one of the best ranged DPS in the game at the moment, especially for Mythic Plus. It is generally found on top of the overall damage meters at the end of any key, and now thanks to the revamped talent tree, you don't have to sacrifice any damage to take an AoE interrupt too. Balance has amazing single target burst damage and is one of the best target swapping classes in the game if you prepare for it. It has amazing sustained AoE damage, especially when it's spread. It really can't be touched in this setting. Being a Druid too, they are ridiculously tanky and also provide some of the best utility in the game. You really cannot go wrong with picking up a Balanced Druid right now, and on top of that, it is some of the most fun I've had gameplay wise in the game. Once again, if you like this video and it did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.